Welcome everyone. My name is Steve Wilcox. I'm a financial advisor and I own a financial planning firm here in San Ramon known as Summit Financial. I've been giving education courses like this for 25 years because I just believe educating people on subjects that to a lot of people aren't as simple as they come to others who focus on this each and every day. Very, very important. So we're going to, at least for my time, focus more on the financial side of planning and some of the things you need to know about. And that's basically what I'll focus on. When you talk about the things like financial planning, and like I said, everything's interconnected, there are a number of things that you have to think about. It isn't just people think of investing or saving. There are a number of things that you need to think of. The first one that I think is most critical when you're doing your own planning is what I refer to as just cash flow planning. A lot of times people think about, I need to save X amount of money for my retirement, or people think about, what things, debts that they have and other things. I think the most important thing you need to understand is your entire life is really about cash flow. Nobody actually lives on, the retirement account, meaning it's $1 million. They live on what it can do for them on a monthly basis. And that starts from the day you start earning an income to the day you're managing your own expenses. It's really important, I hate the word budget, but it's really important periodically to think about what is life costing, what do we spend, and then of course I'm a real believer in dreams and planning. What do we want to spend? I get a kick out of my clients who are thinking about retirement, and they will tell me, let's say they make $100,000 a year, whatever their number is, and they spend, say, net of taxes, $8,000 a month, and then I'll be talking about retirement, and they'll say something like, yeah, but we think we could get away with 6. And it's like, well, try it now, and let's see if you can do it. And it's amazing because people try to force feed themselves into a budget that really isn't real. Well, we'll just spend a little less on this, or we won't do this. You should plan your life, start with wants, think about what is it I'd like to accomplish, what is it I'm trying to do. The first thing I tell clients when they walk into my office is I always tell them, all right, just talk in wants today. I owe you as a professional the reality check. Yeah, well, I understand you want to retire with $10 million a month of income, but that's not realistic. And so I always owe people the reality check, but you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't at least start out with, what am I trying to do? What do I like to do? Wouldn't you rather know that if you worked one additional year, you could increase your vacation budget by $20,000 a year, as an example? Most people would like to know that before it's too late, and too late is when I'm 75 and I've run out of money, because I didn't know that if I had just worked a little bit longer or saved a little bit differently, that I might have actually been able to accomplish that amazing goal because leisure travel was going to be important to me, or whatever it is that's important to you. How we manage cash flow is really important. So cash flow is kind of the first part of financial planning. Better answers in finances, and there aren't any cookie cutter answers. If I were to ask everybody in this room, how much money do you spend each year on vacation? I would get a variety of different answers, right? Some of you might say, well, we spend $1,000 a year on vacation. Someone else might say we spend $30,000 a year. Now on the surface, you might think, wow, the $30,000 sounds a lot more fun. The $1,000 might just be a family who loves to camp and they've already got the equipment. Neither of those is right or wrong, but do you think it takes different savings patterns and planning to decide how much I'm going to have? What are the odds every one of us in this room drives the same kind of car? Right? I mean, not good, right? We all drive different cars. Some of us drive them for 3 years and get a new one. Some of us drive them for 20 years. So again, when you read things in magazines or you see things on TV that say things like, you're going to need 70% of your income to retire on, be careful. How does anyone possibly know what you're going to need for your retirement? What I call contingency planning is kind of the next thing, and it's really important. Contingency planning is, the what if things that do happen in life, right? What if, unfortunately, you become disabled and can't work? Are you protected? Is there a way to support your family with income? What if, unfortunately, you pass away? What if you get in a car accident? What if you get sick? Obviously, the thing that solves most of the contingency issues that happen in our lives is insurances. Obviously, we need to make sure we have good health insurance. We need to know that if something happens to the person who's supporting the family, the breadwinner, for a lack of a better term, we've got to make sure they have life insurance appropriately to cover them and the family. Okay? And for families like yourself who have other unique characteristics in your life, you got to make sure there's enough to support not only your children, but potentially someone who may have to care for them, and making sure those things are thought about. So that's contingency planning. But I think it's really important to focus on the people side as well. And I always say when I talk about estate planning, that the first thing you think about is the people issues, right? And then think about the money second. Because people think of estate planning, the word estate just implies lots of money or something, and that matters. And we've got to do our job right and make sure that we're thinking about all the things around estate planning that we need to. But start with the people issues. Who, how do I want them to get it? When do I want them to get it? I have 3 children. Okay, so I've got 3 children, and their ages range between 12 and 23. All right, and they're equal beneficiaries of my estate. 2 of them are still minors, but I'm just a classic example of why you need to do proper estate planning. First of all, they're kids. If something happened to me and they inherited money, they're not capable of managing it, right? So I have a trustee named who's going to manage it. Guardianship, this is a people issue, right? If something happened to my wife and I simultaneously, and we don't have a will or a trust, the state's going to start trying to figure out who we wanted to raise our children. Where do you think they're going to start? Family, right? Yeah, they're going to look, do they have parents? Do they have siblings? Do they, all these types of things? Well, I have 2 living parents. Between us, we've got 4 siblings, and not one of those people I just said are named to be guardians in my trust. Now, before you wonder what's wrong with Steve's family, my parents are 75 years old. God loved them. They're doing well. They're enjoying their life, but they raised a family, and they live up in Lincoln, and I don't want my kids to have to move. And I don't want to put that on my parents. My one brother lives in Boston. He's married. They have no children, and they said they never wanted children. That's their choice. They're not bad people. Okay? My younger brother, until about a year and a half ago, wasn't married. Now he's married. And again, that might be a future thought on my part. And then again, I'm not going to go into my wife's sisters. But again, we're a perfect example of why planning matters. The people issues. When, how. I don't want them to get all this money. They're too young. So documenting your goals, they'll talk a lot more about that later. This last one's real near and dear to my heart. So Brendan's here today. He's my colleague at work. I told you I have a firm here in San Ramon, and we do lots of stuff, retirement planning, all kinds of good stuff. Our kind of specialty and niche is we focus on planned giving, philanthropy, and sort of what people are going to accomplish when they leave this planet, if you will. And so I have a real love for helping people know what they're capable of. You don't have to be the Rockefellers to have some kind of a legacy. People always think, yeah, that, philanthropy and giving away a lot of money, that's for people who have substantial wealth. Again, but it's a real thing near and dear to me. And one of the reasons I love to work with organizations like this one is I want to try to help people know what they're capable of. And when there's an organization like this that is obviously providing an amazing service to families like yours, maybe someday in your heart, as you're thinking about the things in your life that mattered, etc., you might consider how you can continue to benefit this organization. Because long after all of us in this room are gone, there's still going to be a need, right? And we want to make sure that people like this in this organization have the ability to do that. So I love this type of planning. But again, helping people think through it on a dream side. I talked about this at the very beginning, coordinated effort. Think about all your finances together. Cash flow is important. What are you trying to accomplish? And again, all this stuff is really important because they all feed into one another, right? If I spend money during my lifetime, it's not money I can leave behind, right? But some things can be coordinated. I've got a case study I'm going to talk about near the very end that just kind of shows you that you can accomplish everyone's goals and kind of have a win-win approach to your finances too. So I think some of that stuff's kind of fun. Whether we like it or not, there's a lot of tax implications to almost everything we do in our finances. And when it comes to estate planning, most people may or may not be aware of all the rules, etc. And so it's important to think through exactly what's going to happen when you're gone someday as to what's the most efficient way to leave money. Okay, so taxes are important, but these are things that you need to think about. So on the note of taxes, every once in a while I'll be sitting with somebody and we'll be talking about their estate plan, my retired clients who are thinking about these things, and they'll say, yeah, we're probably going to leave, $100,000 to the church. And I'll say, well, how? And they say, well, it says it in our will. I said, so they're just going to get cash? Why don't you leave them the $100,000 IRA instead? And they'll look at me like, why would I do that? It's like, well, because they get it tax-free. Your kids would have to pay tax on that one. It's the same dollar amount to the organization, but people don't always think about what is it I'm doing and how could I have done it better. If I write a check to my favorite organization for $100 and I take a donation on that, right, I get a $100 deduction. They got $100 to use in their organization. Wouldn't it be better if I gave them $100 worth of stock that I paid $1 for? They still get $100. I no longer have to pay tax on the $99 gain someday. And again, I'm just giving you a couple examples. to just try to get you thinking that you have a lot of control in how you manage your finances and how you can actually accomplish goals and things in a more efficient manner. Wishes to actual. This is something I've been doing. I was sharing with Ellen. I've been doing this for 25 years, usually on a piece of yellow paper. But when I sit down with people and we start talking about their legacy and their estate, and if something happens to you, what's going to happen? I always say, okay, I'm going to draw 2 lines. So there's 3 columns, because every one of us in this room basically has 3 beneficiaries of our estate. We're either going to leave it to family and friends, people, the IRS, or charity. Those are your 3 choices. How many of you in this room want to fill that IRS column with a big number? Yeah. Now, but the reality is, without thinking through the implications, it's oftentimes what's going to happen. There are tax implications when we pass away. And so it goes back to the what are you trying to accomplish first? And I always tell people, let's just pretend you get to decide what percent goes to family, what goes to charity, and people will fill in different numbers and percentages. And then, of course, we've got to do the legal work and the documents and all the stuff necessary to make sure that's what's happening. But it's just, again, a really important thing. You know, nobody in this room is going to pass away tomorrow, right? Yet 1 in 6 of us do before 65. I mean, it's just, you've got to plan for your estate not just when you're 85 years old and it's more likely a reality, but you've got to plan for it if something happens to you today. If in my heart, when I'm gone, I want to make sure I leave some money to some organizations in my world that have mattered to me and that I think are good, if I want to leave some money to certain friends, family, kids, etc., I don't think I'm going anywhere anytime soon. But those documents need to be in place and you need to revise them. Okay, and it's really important to know all the ways that those things get accomplished. Again, I'm going to leave it to the experts to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the things like special needs trust, healthcare, etc. I'll talk a little bit about beneficiary designations. They're very powerful when it comes to financial planning. If I've got a will and a trust, and the will and trust says I leave everything to my wife if I'm gone, but I've got this little IRA over here that I named my ex-girlfriend way back when as beneficiary, who do you think gets that when I'm gone? Doesn't matter that my will and trust says everything goes to my wife. Now, it might end up in court and all kinds of other stuff, but the reality is pay attention to your beneficiary designations. They show up in a few different places. They show up in life insurance. They show up in pensions, IRAs, 401ks, annuities. And actually now you can actually open accounts at banks and at brokerage firms called TOD, transfer on death, POD, payable on death. So you can actually name beneficiaries on almost any kind of asset. But pay attention to who you named and make sure you keep those things up to date, and obviously work with advisors and CPAs and folks who can help you understand the implications of why it might make sense to leave one type of thing to somebody versus another. So most of my philanthropy and charitable giving when I'm gone someday is going to be coming out of my IRAs and retirement accounts, simply because there's a tax benefit, not a deductible benefit, but the organization that receives it won't have to pay tax on these dollars. If I leave my IRAs to my kids, they're going to still pay tax on them someday. Again, I'm not telling you to start giving away all your money, because remember the coordinated thing? Just think through these things. Like, if I plan to leave money, what's the most efficient way that I can do it? So these are things that are real important. And then, of course, there's lifetime decisions of gifting. And obviously, we want to be efficient in that, and that's what I was kind of referring to with the stock example. You know, appreciated stock versus, you know, just giving gifts outright. The official rule goes back to like 2012, but basically you can pass away, an individual can pass away, and the rule up until a few weeks ago was that you could leave $5.5 million, I'm rounding, to anyone you choose, no tax implications. They just doubled that to $11 million, okay? But just so you know, the estate tax laws have changed more than our income tax laws since the inception of this country. It's because it's a political tool and they trade it back and forth. So don't be convinced that that won't ever change again. So pay attention, one. But it expires like in 2025. So well, that's what I mean. Permanent law that expires. And Congress is going to meet again lots of times, and we're going to elect different presidents and different parties. And so it's just, don't get comfortable in, I did my estate plan, I don't have to think about it anymore. The rules do change, and we just need to pay attention. But the question's a good one. So I can't speak for everybody in this room, but most people don't have $11 million. Okay? So most of us just kind of think, don't have to worry about estate taxes, but you still may have to worry about income taxes. And there's other tax examples. Now, That's estate and income are two different taxes. If I pass away, just to exaggerate the point, with $10,999,000 in my IRA, good, no estate taxes. Well, my kids are going to owe income taxes on that entire thing. Now, there's some ways to stretch it out and make it last longer, but someday those dollars will be taxed. All right? Now, again, to exaggerate the point, and this would be a really good point, if I left that $10 million to the Down Syndrome Connection, yes, they would get it tax-free. They would get it tax-free. And again, you know, we all hear the thing about charity starts at home. I had this conversation with a very philanthropic client who lives in Arizona. And when I explained to him how much money he would be leaving his kids, first of all, he didn't want them to have that much. And just to give you crude numbers, this is going back a couple of years. This is when the estate exemption was about $3 million. All right, and he had more than that. And so we went through this whole exercise, and basically when he passes away, it's assumed that he'll have about a $10 million estate. And we went through this whole exercise, and I said, well, you can leave 10 to your kids, and they're going to get 7. I mean, and he's all, what? Well, the difference in taxes, that's why they'll get 7 instead of 10. Or you can leave 6 to your kids and 4 to charity, and you directed all 10. And of course, he thought that was a much better plan. So he did some things and set up some trust. And one of the things I'm going to give an example of later is he set up something known as a charitable remainder trust. So he actually didn't have to give away the money. He got to continue to get income. There's all kinds of really cool ways that you can get to the end game. Again, those rules change. We need to pay attention to estate and all that good stuff. If I worry about, let's say, I just want to make sure it didn't continue to change. People focus on different things in their finances, and the most overlooked and most impactful item in your planning is taxes. A lot of people will look at their investments and say, gosh, this investment was up 8%, this one was up 9%. So great to get that extra 1%. I'm not suggesting it's not better to earn more money on your investments. But if I have a taxable dollar and I'm in a 30% tax bracket, I'm losing 30 cents, 30% of my investment return. Focusing on taxes is really important during your lifetime and when you're gone, really understanding the tax rules and how they can play into your favor. We, of course, just got a new tax change, so we all need to figure out the implications as they relate to us individually. But again, tax code is what it is, and I'm not suggesting anyone break the rules, but I think taxpayers owe it to themselves to know the rules and know what's in this new tax code and how can I make changes in my personal life that might affect, positive for myself. Estate and transfer, again, the question around how much can you leave. The current exemption, again, it's approximately $11 million per person. That means $22 million for a married couple. Okay, so I mean, again, they really changed that exemption. It's pretty high now. Step-up rules. Before we started today, someone was asking me a question about, parents giving a home to the kids, getting it out of their name, those types of things. Be careful. In planning, work with professionals, talk to your attorneys, and understand the implications of what it is you're trying to accomplish. When people start talking about giving away assets, normally they're trying to do it to shelter, how much money they have so they may qualify for some benefits and some other things. But again, start with the end in mind. What is it we're trying to accomplish? Has real estate appreciated here in the Bay Area? It's insane, right? I mean, my parents spent $11,000 for their first house, and that rallied into a house in Mountain View worth like $2.8 million now. They're not still there, unfortunately. They long since sold that a long time ago, but I mean, in a sense, real estate appreciation has been pretty extraordinary. If my parents paid $100,000 for a house and today it's worth $1 million, and they pass away, in the eyes of the IRS, if I'm their beneficiary, it's like I paid $1 million for it. I can sell it and there's no taxes. If my parents give me their house while they're living, and then to get it out of their name, and then they pass away, in the eyes of the IRS, I paid $100,000 for it. I take on their tax basis if they give me the asset. And therefore, when they pass away and I say I'm going to sell the house now, I'm going to owe unnecessarily some capital gains taxes. Be careful when you start shifting and giving away assets. The other thing, and this doesn't get policed a lot by the IRS, but be careful with inadvertent gifts. There are gift tax rules. Right now you're allowed to give $14,000 a year to anyone you choose, and the IRS could care less. That used to be 10, by the way. Most people know it as the $10,000 rule. That's why when you go to the bank and you deposit more than $10,000, it's reported to the IRS. Anyway, so $14,000, anyone you choose. Let's just assume my mom's got $500,000 in her checking account, and for the record, she doesn't, unfortunately. But let's say she has $500,000 and she says, you know, I'm getting a little older. I think I'm going to put you on the account with me, Steve. Be careful, because she just, in a way, gave me a $250,000 gift. It's an inadvertent gift. She didn't intend to. It's really her money. The better way to handle it is just keep it in her name, put it in her trust, make me a co-trustee if she wants me to have control. So control and ownership are two really critical things when you're thinking about estate planning, okay? So again, very important how these things are done. I'm going to focus a little bit here on planned giving and then certainly open up to questions. Planned giving really is part of estate planning. It's kind of, you know, how are we going to leave our assets in an efficient way, and how are we going to maybe in some ways take care of some of the organizations and things that matter to us while we were living. I've been a financial advisor now for 25 years. I'm blessed to have a pretty mature business and a lot of other advisors specializing in a lot of things. One of the things that I really love, because over the last 25 years, the most rewarding work that I've done is when I've sat down with clients and I've helped them do some legacy planning and charitable trusts and foundations and these types of things, because there's so many ways to do it in a win-win manner. And of course, just because you leave the planet someday doesn't mean some of the things you cared about, you know, you don't want to still care about. So that's why I think planned giving is kind of fun. And there's a lot of really cool things, and it's very rewarding for people to know that they're capable of making these differences. These are not all, but these are some of the more common ways that we do planned giving. The first one, just outright gifts, you know, a bequest. So when I pass away, I have the right to say I'm going to leave some money to my Rotary Club, to Down Syndrome Connection, to organizations that mattered to me while I was here. All right, so these are just outright gifts. Donor advised funds, foundations. So foundations, I think people kind of think of those, again, the ultra wealthy, the Rockefellers, Kennedys, these foundations that have been around for many years. But foundations, there's a lot of technical stuff that needs to be done with foundations, and they can be confusing and a lot more work than they need to be, and they really aren't for everyone. But basically the way they work, because a lot of people mystique around foundations. Let's assume I have a substantial estate, you know, $10 million, and you know, my kids are fine and I don't want them to get it all. I want to leave most of it to charitable work. So I set up the foundation. When I'm gone, I leave all my assets to the foundation. I can do this while I'm alive too, by the way. And now this foundation, for the rest of time, or you know, till it runs out of money or some specific events, is going to make grants to organizations, typically in areas of interest that I had when I was living. So, real dear client of mine unfortunately passed away a couple years ago, and I helped her establish a foundation while she was alive. And she was lucky enough to live for about 6 years while the foundation was active, so it became some of her most rewarding work in retirement. She would make grants to organizations, and in her particular case, all of the organizations were the environment, the outdoors, animals. I mean, she left, you know, she would donate money to Save Mount Diablo and the Lindsay Wildlife Museum and the Feral Cat Society, and I mean, just a bunch of stuff. And through my help, now she had no children, no natural beneficiaries, through my help, we got all of her beneficiaries and her IRAs changed. We had this foundation, and she passed away now about 3 years ago, and it's really neat to see her foundation sending money to these organizations she loved when she was living. And I just feel really cool about that, that like I helped her at least understand that this is something she was capable of. And again, she had a lot of money by most regards, but we're not talking about, you know, north of $5 million or anything, just a sizable estate that she was able to make a difference. So that's how foundations can be used. Donor advised funds, a little more simplified version, and we see these used a lot more and more nowadays. But basically a donor advised fund, if I put $10,000 into a donor advised fund, like any charitable contribution, that's deductible. So for tax purposes, there might be some benefit. Now what I do is I advise the folks who hold the funds where I want donations to go. So I ask them, would you please send a grant to Down Syndrome Connection? Would you please send a grant to my Rotary Club? Would you please send a grant? And I get to direct where the charitable dollars go. So it's kind of the same thing as a foundation in that I'm directing dollars that I had put in there earlier or years ago. And this is something that very useful in planning. And these specifically do not have to be gigantic pools of money. But you get to say right in it, I want to make sure that each year, if I pass away, you know, my kids will be in charge of the donor advised fund and they can decide, but I want to make sure they give money to these organizations each and every year. It's things that matter to me. So a really useful way to do some planning. I'm going to go through a sample of a charitable remainder trust, but a charitable remainder trust in simple form is you put money into this trust, you get income for the rest of your life, on the date of your passing, whatever the remainder is goes to the charitable organization or organizations that you named. And again, I'm going to go through an example on that one. Charitable lead trust, we don't see a lot of these at all. It's talked about, it just doesn't happen a lot. But this is, when I really do want to leave money to my kids, I can fund the charitable lead trust. It can send its income for a period of years to charitable organizations, and by creating a larger and larger deduction, eventually the assets that were put in there can revert to my children tax-free. I mean, that's in simplified version of what that's trying to do. The most common one people hear about, Jackie Onassis did this type of planning. If you recall, the Kennedys had some pretty good money, and then the Onassises had even more. And so what she had done is basically, I want my kids to get it, but I'm going to make it a very charitable pool of money during my lifetime. And so that's kind of some of the planning she had done. Gift annuity, we see these once in a while. It kind of depends on the economic environments we're in. But a gift annuity, some organizations will allow you to give them a pool of money. So let's just say you gave an organization $100,000, and they'll send you, there's an actuary type calculation that'll go on, but they'll send you, say, $400 a month for the rest of your life. So in a sense, you gave them a pool of money, they're going to send you, it's an annuity, and on the date of your passing, they keep the remainder balance. And again, these are used periodically as a way of, I'm not quite ready to give up my money because I need income, but I sure do like the idea of this organization getting to keep whatever's left, and this is kind of a neat trade-off tool that we see once in a while used out there. Testamentary gift, again, things that we're going to leave at death. Again, strategic, who gets what, when. There's so much work that goes into this depending on the complexity of your life. If you've got children, okay, if you have a special needs child, if you've got a business partner, if you've got multiple kids, different families, blended families, there's, the more complex those things are, it's really important to take the time out to really think through. No one likes at the dinner table to talk about, when I'm gone, this is what I want it to look like. But it's important planning. We really do need to take the time out to think about, who gets what, when, how. Is this really my wishes? Okay, and there's certain types of things that we come across all the time. If we've got families who have, I'll ask of you, how many of you in the room, show of hands, have more than one child? Right? How many of you who have your hands up would say that kids are exactly the same? Yeah, no, I figured out as a parent long ago that whatever works for one of my kids, the only thing guaranteed is that it will not work again for another kid. I mean, this one eats, this one sleeps better, this one's active, this one's an artist, this one's analytical. It's like, oh my God. It's like, what happened, But it's just kind of funny. And so when I pass away someday, my kids are still pretty young. What if two of them are really good with money and one of them isn't? Okay? I mean, if somebody's not capable of managing money, I don't want to do them the disservice of leaving them a bunch of money. That doesn't mean I can't equally treat them by, say, leaving it into a trust that will be managed for them, and maybe they'll get a stipend, a monthly income. Maybe as they hit certain benchmarks, like if I pass away today, my 12-year-old gets nothing immediately. The trustee has the right to pay for education, health, maintenance, and all kinds of things that may come up. But then he gets a third of his money at 25, a third more at 30, and a third more at 35, unless I change it along the way. Now, by the time he's 35, 23 years from now, I'll be in my 70s, and I might change my mind and say he can have it all now. But that's why you got to keep these things up to date. Okay, who's going to manage the money, etc. And it's really important. I don't have a strong opinion on this, but I've seen enough of this done that oftentimes the caregivers and the people who are going to take care of the kids, the family, or somebody who needs care is not the best person to name as the person managing the money. Okay? It's nice to have those two things kind of separated out. They should have the right to be supported properly and have some, what they can request and stuff, because you don't want somebody caring for your kid to have their hands tied and be an economic burden when, somebody else is managing the money. Life insurance. Life insurance has lots of different uses, and virtually all of the best ones are unfortunately when you pass away. But a lot of times people don't think of some of the strategic uses of life insurance. So the normal, obvious reason that we need life insurance, and so I'll use again me as an example. I got 3 kids. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. I've got a business partner. I've got some debt. I have a mortgage, etc. So there's lots of reasons that unfortunately if Steve passes away, there are some people economically dependent on me. So for obvious reasons, that's a good reason for me to buy life insurance, so that if I were to die, then that money would pay to my wife and she'd have money to continue the family moving forward. Okay? So that's the obvious reason for life insurance. Other reasons for life insurance, though, that people don't always think about, and I see a lot of people will retire and they'll say, well, I'm just going to cancel the insurance because the kids are grown, the mortgage is paid. And what they're failing to realize is this tool, which was taken out so that when you die, somebody's going to get a pool of money, that's where it's at its best. So why not maybe shift assets and just change the need of it? Maybe you can name your favorite charitable organization. Maybe you can leave it to one kid because the other kid wants the family house. I mean, there's all kinds of uses of life insurance that people don't always consider. A lot of people also don't realize, and they just cancel their insurance, that your insurance might actually have a value. In other words, you've been paying for this insurance all these years, and now you're just going to cancel it. Well, there are companies who will actually buy the policy from you, pay the premiums for you, and actually you're no longer in the mix, except that your life still matters for the policy. And then, of course, they collect at some point. But most people just think their life insurance is worthless, if they don't die with it, if you will. And again, there's lots of strategic tools with life insurance and ways to coordinate. Equalization, like I said, if I'm leaving my one kid the house, maybe I'll use life insurance to equalize it. Business planning, I have a partner in my firm. If something happens to me, he doesn't want to be partners with my wife. So there's insurance in place so that he can buy out my interest so that fairly she gets treated for the business. And these are just things that life insurance can be used for. Outright gifting, we're talking about planned giving a little bit. You have the right to take out a policy and leave it directly to an organization. I kind of talk to people a lot of times about what is it you're trying to do. And let's just say somebody says, well, I give $1,000 a year away to XYZ not-for-profit. And, I'm thinking about increasing that a little bit or something. And I'll explain to them, well, when you're gone someday, wouldn't it be nice if they still could get $1,000 a month? And they'll look at me like, well, I won't be here to do that. What are you talking about? Well, it's pretty simple. $1,000 a month. What if you were to take out about a $200,000 insurance policy on your life, and it might cost you $500 a month or not that much, $500 a year while you're living, but now on the day of your death, you direct the beneficiary on the policy to be the organization, but we're going to send it to them monthly until it's gone. So your legacy is continuing on. You, of course, can do that for people, too. Most life insurance policies allow for either a lump sum to the beneficiary, or you can actually stagger it as income if that's how you so choose. Now, again, gifting is a lot of fun when you're living because you get to see it. But again, I think to a lot of us, the planet's going to be here when we're gone, and hopefully we leave it in better shape than we started. But if we can take care of things, it'd be pretty good. Here's a simple case study, and I don't know if you can read it back there, but you probably have the handout. And I apologize, this is a pretty complex topic, and I'm going to try to simplify it. But I really love the idea of what I call win-win planning. And again, this is just a sample for that. So John and Jane Doe, they want more income. They have a $10,000 investment in ABC stock, which is now worth $1 million. All right, again, happens, right? There's some companies we could probably name here locally where we've seen incredible growth. Only asset that they're not currently using for income, so this is the thing they're thinking we might need some income. They're charitable, so again, I've seen that they're giving away money each and every year. So they've got that sort of belief system, they give away money. They've got 2 children who are their primary beneficiaries. Imagine that, they don't like taxes. And they were thinking in their planning, they were going to leave some to charity at death, but they just haven't acted on it in their estate planning documents. Let's assume for my example that ABC company doesn't pay a dividend, right? So, because dividend would be getting some income from the company every time they make profits. So the only way to get income, because they need more income now, is we're going to have to sell the stock. What's the problem with selling the stock? You got it. $990,000 capital gain in the great state of California. That would be, just for round numbers, about $300,000 in taxes. So if this person sells the stock, they're going to net $700,000. Of course, they have the right to invest the $700,000, and that would solve the problem. They would get more income. But they gave up $300,000 to do it, right? So the case here, instead, they're going to establish something known as a charitable remainder trust. So they establish this document known as a charitable remainder trust, and they're going to donate stock to the trust. So they're going to take this ABC stock and make a donation to the trust. Okay, so now the charitable trust owns the company. and within the trust then they're going to sell it. They're going to receive a current year partial income tax charitable deduction based on the remainder interest. So just to kind of give you an example, everyone's circumstances are different. Dependent on your age, the IRS recognizes that you didn't just give $1 million to charity, right? You put $1 million into a trust that's going to send you income for the rest of your life, and then on the date of your passing, it's going to go to charity. So they give you a present value deduction for presumptive future interest. So you might get a $200,000 deduction, let's say if you're 60 years old, you and your spouse are 60, just making a number, but that's a $200,000 tax deduction. Remember I said coordinated earlier? What if the year I do this, I convert one of my IRAs to a Roth IRA, not pay tax because I got this big deduction over here, and now that's tax-free too. There's all kinds of fun stuff you can do in finance. But I'm not going to go down that road. I'm going to stick to this. So charitable remainder trust. So this company or this couple put this money into that, and they're going to get a big tax deduction. The trust then sells the stock, and there's no capital gain because it's inside this charitable trust. So we just saved $300,000 in taxes. Okay? Now, apples to apples, they can take this $1 million and invest it in all the exact same things that they could have invested the $700,000. Question, do you get more income off $1 million or off $700,000? Yeah, sure. But all with the same investments, right, presumptively? Because they're going to invest, and let's just say that they set this trust up to send them 5% a year for the rest of their lives. All right? So if they take 5% of $1 million, they're going to get $50,000 a year. All things being equal, the identical investments in $700,000 probably would have given them $35,000 a year, right? So they're getting an extra $15,000 having avoided the tax. The CRT invests in a balanced portfolio, setting them 5% per year. They take some of that income and they purchase $1 million life insurance, and they name their kids as the beneficiaries. Okay? So that extra $15,000, what if they take 8 or 10 of it, approximately depending on their age, a year, and buy $1 million life insurance policy, and they name their kids? At their passing, they leave the balance of the trust to their favorite charities, such as the Down Syndrome Connection of the Bay Area. So they created, let's just say for the sake of argument, the trust return was 5% a year and it distributed 5%. So it's $1 million to charity, right? Quite a legacy. And they weren't even thinking about that when they started down this road. They just said, we need more income. What'd their kids get? $1 million. Life insurance, tax-free. Okay? Win-win planning. Yes, there's a lot of variables here. The insurance has to cost there's a lot of things you think about before you start doing this. But I think in a place like the Bay Area where we've seen the results of highly appreciating stock as a result mostly of Silicon Valley and the tech industry. Everybody who owns a home in the Bay Area has seen incredible appreciation on their home. And though your home has some other rules that allow for some tax favorability, those of you who own any rental real estate, etc., this type of planning is really helpful. One of the things I think I have learned in 25 years of doing this type of work, taxes matter. And people oftentimes start thinking about charity because of taxes, but rarely do people do this kind of planning unless they really have charitable and philanthropic intent. It's rare that taxes alone are a reason to do this kind of thing. And that's just sort of my experience. And I had a neat example here recently where I sat down with a client, and he was the benefactor of a company that was bought. So he worked for a company, software company, somebody bought them, and then he had a really nice windfall as far as money, right? So all of a sudden his net worth went from, a couple $1 million to what's going to probably be north of 20 at some point. Okay, good day. And I owe it to him to just understand more of sort of his big picture goals, because not everyone wants their kids to inherit that kind of wealth. It may ruin them. I mean, quite honestly, if my kids just think they're going to inherit a bunch of money, I might be disabling their ability to go have productive lives, chase their dreams, do the things that they wanted to do. So he and I got into this conversation, and I started asking him, it's like, well, give me a little sampling of your current philanthropy and charitable work. And he looks at me and he says, well, we really don't give away a lot of money. I say, you don't? I say, your kids go to a school here locally. Is there a foundation at that school? Well, yeah, we write that check every year. You guys go to church? I know that. You're friends of mine. I hear about it all the time. Well, yeah, we give the church money. You were on the Little League board with me. I know you donated money to help build the field. Well, okay, yeah, and you start talking to people and it's like, everyone in this room is probably more philanthropic than they know. And it's really important to tie your financial plans to those dreams and the things. Not everyone gets a $20 million payday. That's a really good day. And when you do, then really, really think hard about what the implications are of that. Because money can actually ruin people too in a lot of ways if you don't think through some of the ways to be a good steward of that. But that's a real important part of work, I think, is really thinking about the things that matter to you while you're here. Most of you here are families who have a child who potentially at some point will need some help, and there's lots of things that you'll have to consider in your estate planning as a result of that. A lot of you are sitting in this room of what I consider to be an amazing organization, and I'm not asking everyone to get out their checkbook and start writing checks to the Down Syndrome Connection. That's not the purpose of this speech. They would like that, potentially. No. That's not the purpose of this. But you've seen the work, you've seen the things that they're doing for you, and as time goes on in your life and you're thinking about the many blessings you've had, and you think about this type of work, obviously this type of planning is really important for the longevity of organizations that we care about. Really, the sustainability of really good organizations depends on this type of work, because it's one thing each and every year they're a great organization, but they got to go do what every other organization does in the not-for-profit world. They go fundraise, right? We have events and things like that. Wouldn't it be neat if they weren't so dependent on events because people thought about, gee, when I'm gone, maybe I'll leave a fairly good amount of money, and that starts to build an endowment, and all these kinds of great things can happen for good organizations. I'm going to cut off there. I've got about 5-7 minutes, I think, as far as my time. What questions, anywhere under the sun in the financial world, do you have? Or what can I clarify on anything I said? So the real key is to not give it to somebody else. Putting it in your trust, your own trust, is a great idea. And again, they're going to talk a little bit about that. But remember, when you put money into a trust, when you put anything into a trust, it's still your asset. And so when you pass away, there is what's called a step up in basis. But even if it isn't in a trust, now I don't want to go down this road. A husband and wife, really good idea to have a trust. An individual, if they didn't have a trust, would still get the full step up in basis when they pass. But it's really good planning. And we're blessed to live in a state that's also community property. An asset titled in community property also gets that step up in basis. What I was referring to earlier, and this is the real danger thing, is just me giving assets to my kids while I'm living. They will take on my tax basis. And then when I die, they do not get that step up. Okay, so it's really important. The other thing, and again, this doesn't matter so much with an $11 million exemption, but owning life insurance isn't the greatest idea either for tax purposes. Because if I own my life insurance when I die, it's part of my taxable estate. Now again, with $11 million exemption, that may not matter, right? Because you add up my house and my other stuff, add $1 million of life insurance, whatever the number is. But it's just something to pay attention to. So the two ways around that, there's something known as an irrevocable life insurance trust that can hold the policy, or just someday when they're mature adults, let your kids own the policies, transfer the policy to them if they're your beneficiaries. So again, let Ellen come on up next, and look forward to chatting with any of you afterwards.